Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
I'm Jason Miller. Tonight on the Evan Miller Report, more than a dozen people have been killed in a terror attack in Tunis. We have the latest information. Ukrainian rebels warned they could abandon a ceasefire. This as Russia signs an annexation deal with South Estonia, and NATO allies are scrambling to protect vulnerable Baltic partners from the threat of hybrid warfare from Russia. Also on tonight's program, according to a Saudi prince, Iran and the West are likely to reach a nuclear deal. This, as Iran says there's no difference between Israeli parties. They are all aggressors. And we have the reaction from the U.S. to the elections of Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister for another term. We have all those stories and more, plus Corey Evans.
Thank you, Jay. One of Singapore's key leaders is not doing too well health-wise. The Fed is immersed in more controversy over raising rates soon? Again? How is this still a thing? Walmart's workers are getting a tiny little raise, and now Target are caving and copying. Another lawsuit about oil gets dumped? Crimea River. And Raven-Symoné comes to the aid of a now ousted Univision host. That's all coming up and more in today's episode of your conservative news source. The Evan Miller Report starts now.
Live from Southern California, this is the Evan Miller Report. Jason Miller with news and politics, Corey Evan with business and entertainment. This is the Evan Miller Report on SHR Media. Here now, Jason Miller.
And a very good evening on this Wednesday, March the 18th. 2015. I'm Jason Miller along with Corey Evan. Tonight, also coming up on tonight's program, new water restrictions approved for California residents. We'll tell you what those are.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Yes, it really brings to what Corey said in our opening teaser, Crimea River. And the city of San Diego could add new gender identity and gender expression to a discrimination law. All that and much more in tonight's Global Socialism segment here on the Evan Miller Report. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we start off in the country of Tunis tonight, where 19 people, including 17 foreign tourists, have been killed in a gun attack on the Bardio Museum in the Tunisian capital, Tunis, according to their prime minister. Those killed include citizens from Japan, Italy, Colombia, Australia, France, Poland, and Spain, according to Prime Minister Habib Essid. 2 Tunisians, a police officer, were also killed. Security forces killed 2 gunmen and were searching the surrounding areas for accomplices, Mr. Essid added. At the time of the attack, deputies in the neighboring parliamentary building were discussing anti-terrorism legislation. Parliament was then evacuated. Following the attack, Mr. Essid said, quote, "It is a critical moment in our history and a defining moment for our future. We have not established the identity of the 2 terrorists. Reports are not final. These 2 terrorists could have been assisted by 2 or 3 other operatives." End quote. He also said security operations were still underway. According to the Prime Minister, as we stated earlier, 19 people were killed, although some of the countries involved have different totals. This is what we know right now. 2 Tunisians, as we stated, including 1 police officer involved in the security operation, were killed. 5 were Japanese citizens, 4 Italians, 2 were Colombians, 1 national each from the countries of Australia, France, Spain, and Poland, respectively, and 2 other victims who could not immediately be identified at this time. Earlier reports said that a total of 20 tourists had died and at least 22 tourists and 2 Tunisians injured. Other reports suggested up to 50 could have been hurt. Italian, Polish, South African, French, and Japanese tourists, as we stated, were among the injured and killed. Parliament held an extraordinary session on Wednesday evening. Tunisian President Benji Khalid Esbel said, quote, "We are in a war against terrorism. We will fight them without mercy." While Tunisia has been spared the catastrophic levels of violence that have plagued other Arab Spring countries like Syria, Yemen, and Libya, the country has still suffered from occasional but deadly attacks carried out by Islamic extremists. Back in 2013, 22 people were killed. This included a suicide bomber who attacked a beach resort in Sudanese. Last year, 45 people were killed, and already this year, the death toll has reached 23, with Wednesday's museum raid following an attack on a mountain checkpoint back in February that killed 4 police officers. In all cases, the perpetrators are believed to be jihadists. Tunisian fighters make up a disproportionate high number of foreign recruits to Islamic State, or Daesh, as we like to call them on this program. More than 3,000 have joined, earning themselves a reputation for ferocity both on and off the battlefield. Stay with the Evan Miller Report for the latest on this developing story. And you can find out any information anytime at facebook.com/the Evan Miller Report. Moving on to the Republic of Congo tonight, where they say they will deport 4 pro-democracy activists from Singel and Burkina Faso arrested on Sunday. About 20 other activists arrested on the same day are still being detained at this time. Those facing expulsion are members of the well-known civil society groups which took part in popular uprisings in their countries. The Congolese government says they are suspected of posing a threat to state security. The Republic of Congo's government has accused the detained activists of plotting an insurgency with U.S. backing, an allegation which D.C. has denied. It said pro-democracy event it co-sponsored in the capital, Kinshasa, was nonpartisan. 3 signalist activists were part of a Yunir Amar, "We've Had Enough," event which organized protests to stop the Senegalese president Abdoul Wade from extending his 12-year term in 2012 in defiance of the Constitution. The Burgbi was part of Citoyen Bapli, or Citizen Broom, which helped mobilize people who overthrew Burkina Faso's long-serving ruler, Blaise Compaoré, last year. Concern about stability in the resource-rich Republic of Congo have been mounting ahead of presidential elections due next year. At least 40 people were killed during protests back in January after the opposition raised concern that President Joseph Kabila planned to delay the polls in order to cling to power, a charge the government has so far denied. Over to Ukraine and Russia now, where separatist leaders in eastern Ukraine have threatened today to abandon a ceasefire following charges to a law granting their region self-rule. Alexander Zakrono and Igor Poltavsky said in a statement that legislation giving areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions special status have been weakened by the amendments. "We have agreed to a special status for the Donbass within a renewed Ukraine, although our people wanted total independence. We agreed to this to avoid the spilling of fraternal blood," the statement said. But Ukraine did not renew itself, the statement continued. Rebels have pushed for revisions to the Constitution to decentralize power, but argue that authority is still held by powerful businessmen. A law granting autonomy to eastern territories was approved by Parliament this past Tuesday, but with a number of changes that have been drawn sharp criticism from Moscow-backed rebels and Russia alike. Meanwhile, Russia on Wednesday signed a wide-ranging alliance with Georgia's breakaway region of South Ossetia that will further cement its control over the territory despite fierce condemnation from the West. President Vladimir Putin inked the deal in Moscow with South Ossetian leader Leonid Topolov that officially makes Russia responsible for defending the self-declared republic, where the Kremlin has stationed thousands of troops since a war with Georgia back in 2008. The signing of the controversial pact came as Russia marked 1 year to the day since Putin signed off on the annexation of Ukraine's Black Sea Republic of Crimea. NATO allies are scrambling to protect vulnerable Baltic partners, meantime, from the threat of hybrid warfare from Russia that officials and experts say is based on deception rather than a formal declaration of war. Vladimir Putin's use of anonymous little green men to slice Crimea away from Ukraine last year sent alarm bells ringing through the 3 small Baltic NATO and EU members. They endured decades of Soviet occupation after the Red Army rolled in during World War II. While a full-scale invasion is improbable, now hybrid meddling and destabilization tactics designed to test NATO's commitment to collective defense are not. Putin's brand of hybrid warfare also relies on misinformation, bribery, economic pressure, which are designed to undermine the nation, according to Latvian Defense Minister Radmis Vinos. Lithuanian President Daila Krabaski, and I do apologize if I butchered that name. That's just a long name, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not making an excuse for that. It did not mince her words today when she said, quote, "The first stage of confrontation is taking place. I mean informational war, propaganda, and cyber attacks, so we're really already under attack." According to James Shearer of Britain's Chatham House think tank, hybrid warfare is designed to cripple a state before that state even realizes the conflict has begun. It is a model of warfare designed to slip under NATO's threshold of perception and reaction. NATO Deputy Secretary General Alexander Vershbow has called it a modern example of the ancient Trojan horse tactic. NATO is looking at how we prepare for and deter and, if required, defend against hybrid threats, the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow said recently at a security conference in the Latvian capital, Riga. Not to be caught off guard amid an increased Russian military presence in the Baltic, alliance members have mounted a series of troop rotations into the region. The U.S., meanwhile, has also deployed a cargo ship full of heavy armor there this month, including helicopters and tanks for exercises dubbed Atlantic Resolve. NATO will boost defenses on Europe's eastern flank with a spearhead force of 5,000 troops and command centers in 6 formerly communist members of the alliance, the Baltic states and Bulgaria, Poland, and Romania. Over to Greece now, where the communist Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras Labristad, sounds like a communist to me, continue on with the story though, says his European partners on Wednesday for criticizing a new anti-poverty law hours before it was voted on, saying it was the Eurozone rather than Athens that must stop unilateral actions and keep its word. Tsipras' impassioned speech to Parliament as it prepared to vote for his government's first bill marked the latest escalation in the war of words between Athens and its creditors that has raised the risk of Greek bankruptcy and the possible Eurozone exit. European Council President Donald Tusk called a meeting on Greece for Thursday evening at Tsipras' request on the sidelines of an EU summit with the leaders of Germany, France, and the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the chairman of the Eurozone finance ministers. The leftist Greek leader is pressing for a political decision to break Greece's cash crunch, while the creditors have insisted Athens must start implementing previously agreed economic reforms and hold detailed talks on its financial plans. Tensions over Greek flip-flopping on the terms of a bailout extension agreed last month flared up again after an EU official wrote to Athens urging more talks with lenders on the bill before the vote. The letter told Tsipras' leftist government to hold further talks with the EU on the bill or risk proceeding unilaterally against the terms of a February 20th accord that extended the bailout and staved off a Greek banking collapse. European Economics Commissioner Pierre Mostaf denied the EU was trying to stop Athens from passing the law, but that the official had been to remind the Greek government to consult with leaders first. And lenders, it was lenders, not leaders. The European Union as a whole wants Greece in the Eurozone, Mostaf said, but added that the February deal must be respected. Greece must stay in the Eurozone, but at least at these least conditions. An indigenous Tigris defended the so-called humanitarian crisis law, which offers food and stamps and free electricity to the poor, as the first bill in 5 years drawn up in Athens rather than ordered by EU trenchcoats. Sounds like global socialism to me, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll have more global socialism later on in the program. Over to Venezuela now, where members of the ALBA regional group expressed their support for Venezuela on Tuesday in the face of increasing tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela. An update on a story we were supposed to bring you yesterday, but due to time constraints had to cut. Now to the story. At an emergency summit, Latin American left-winger leaders urged the U.S. to repeal an executive order which President Obama declared Venezuela a threat to national security of the U.S. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed his country was no threat. The two countries have been trading barbs for months. Tension shot up after the U.S. published an executive order, as I mentioned, on March the 9th, announcing sanctions on 7 Venezuelan officials suspected by the United States of committing human rights abuses. In the order, President Obama stated that the situation in Venezuela, including the government's erosion of human rights guarantees, constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. End quote. The wording of the order caused outrage not only with Venezuelan government officials, but also among its regional allies. Mr. Maduro said, quote, Venezuela has no plans, did not have, nor will it have any plans to attack the United States or hurt anyone. He received strong backing from Cuban leader Raul Castro meantime. Mr. Castro announced a rapprochement between his government and that of the U.S. in December after decades of animosity, said the U.S. needs to understand once and for all it cannot seduce or buy Cuba, just as it could not intimidate Venezuela. He also stated our unity is indestructible. Bolivian President Evo Morales said the U.S. government must understand we are not living in the imperial times of the past. Well, that's one person's opinion. But back to the story. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega, meanwhile, said that it was the U.S. and not Venezuela which was a threat to global security. This is not rhetoric. It is reality, he said. Ugandan Foreign Minister Ricardo Panto questioned what the U.S., a country which he said has made torture legal and developed the most powerful mass surveillance system, could teach Latin American nations about human rights. Meanwhile, at a Senate hearing in D.C., the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for South America and Cuba, Alex Lee, meanwhile urged Latin American nations to emphasize to the, quote, Venezuelan government the absolute importance of holding free and fair elections. Parliamentary elections are due to be held in Venezuela later this year. The exact date has not yet been announced. Mr. Maduro won the presidential polls back in 2013 by a razor-thin margin. Opposition leader Henrique Capriles cried foul, but following an audit of the electronic voting system, the election authority confirmed Mr. Maduro's poll victory of 50.7% of votes to Mr. Capriles' 49.1%. And Corey Evan, what can I say? I suspect voter fraud is written all over that previous election, and I would not be surprised if it happened later this year.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of running voting systems around the world now. It's not just the U.S. anymore, ladies and gentlemen, and it's not just online. It could be present at the polling places as well, so keep an eye out.
Absolutely right. All right, one more final story before we send it over to Corey Evan to wrap up our international news brief before we get on to D.C. news tonight. American involvement in a recent Philippine assault that is believed to have killed the top Southeast Asian terror suspect but left scores of Filipino commandos dead is a bittersweet finale to a decade-long U.S. battle against terrorism in the country's south. The U.S.-backed Filipino police commando raid back on January 25th reportedly killed a long-wanted Malaysian militant, Zulfi bin Hur, in the marsh outskirts of Manifesto, a town in the region. A month later, the American military deactivated an anti-terror task force that oversaw what they had seen as a relatively successful 13-year American battle against terrorism in the southern Philippines. A smaller U.S. military contingent still remains in the rest of the region. A Philippine Senate investigation report on the bloody anti-terror assault, which was made public on Tuesday, provided details on the extent of America's behind-the-scenes involvement in the raid, including how 6 U.S. personnel joined a battle monitoring post manned by Filipino police generals. The Americans provided intelligence, combat training, maps, equipment, and surveillance that could be viewed on TV sets, according to the report. One of the Americans reportedly ordered a military general at one point to fire artillery to support the embattled commandos, but the Filipino commander refused to do so in disgust, said the report, without identifying the American or his unit. Do not dictate to me what to do. I am the commander here, the Senate report quoted the general, identified as a Filipino Army Major General Edmano Pegling, as saying. The U.S. Embassy did not immediately comment on the Senate report. from the Philippines, which said there was a need to review defense ties between the Philippines and its treaty ally, the United States, including their alliance in the battle against terrorism. All right, folks, it's time to send it over to Corey Evan, and he has the latest in the wrap on our international news. And Corey, we start off in Singapore tonight.
Yes, the condition of Singapore's 91-year-old founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, has deteriorated further at the hospital where he's been treated for about 6 weeks, the government said today. Mr. Lee was admitted to Singapore General Hospital on February 5th for severe pneumonia and was later put on life support. The Prime Minister's office said in a statement Wednesday that Mr. Lee, quote, remains critically ill in the ICU and is deteriorated further. On Tuesday, it was said that Mr. Lee's condition had worsened due to an infection. He is on antibiotics. The doctors are closely monitoring his condition. As Singapore's first prime minister, Mr. Lee ruled for 31 years until 1990 and has been credited with transforming the city-state from a sleepy tropical port to a wealthy, bustling financial hub with one of the highest average incomes in the world. Next up, out of Indonesia, Indonesia will on Sunday end on a search for the bodies of 56 people missing from an AirAsia jet that crashed in the Java Sea in December, a National Rescue Agency official said. According to Today Online, an AirAsia Flight 8501 lost contact with air traffic control due to bad weather less than halfway into a 2-hour flight from Surabaya, Indonesia, to Singapore on December 28th. All 162 people on board the Airbus A320 were killed. The flight data and cockpit voice recorders, known as black boxes, were recovered 2 weeks after the crash. Large pieces of the fuselage were also found on the sea floor. A multinational rescue effort led by the Indonesian military and often hampered by bad weather and strong currents recovered 106 bodies, with 56 unaccounted for. Few details flight recorders analysis have been made public yet. The National Transportation Safety Committee has revealed the French first officer was at the controls of the jet just before the accident. Sources told Reuters the captain was out of his seat when his co-pilot apparently lost control, but Indonesian authorities said no evidence of that exists. The AirAsia crash was the latest in the string of accidents to hit Indonesia's aviation industry, which is among the fastest growing in the region, and has stepped up pressure on the government and airlines to improve safety. The final result of the investigation is due in about 6 months, according to an investigator. Right, coming up after the break, we have Target and Walmart now nipping at each other's heels as far as wage hikes go. I can hardly talk. In lawsuits across America, in addition to oil, I've got stories about if this thing will work properly. After the break, I've got lawsuits across America as well. That's all you need to know. It's going to be a good one. Yes. And in addition to that, Raven Simone is defending that now ousted Univision host on The View of all places. And Jay, you've got updates on Iran and the West reaching a nuclear deal. Sounds too good to be true to me.
Yeah, that's right, Corey. According to a Saudi prince, he says Iran and the United States and other Western allies are likely to reach a nuclear deal. This, as Iran says there's no difference between Israeli parties after the Israeli elections yesterday, and they say all aggressors are Mara. They'll tell you what that means. Plus, the U.S.'s supposed response to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu winning the election tonight on the Evan Miller Report. All that plus the DC news and global socialism when we return to your conservative news source, the Evan Miller Report. We'll be right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Is radio.
Fact news. Fact news.
Radio.
Fact news. Fact news.
Radio.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
How you doing? John Grant here. When I'm not slaving over a hot microphone on the 405radio.com Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I check out Sean and Clint here at Sackheads Radio. We all appreciate the best political bloggers, writers, and commentators. We either get them on our shows or we make fun of them, as it should be. So check us out live Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern or forever on the podcasts on the 405radio.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific for me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Hello, I'm Paul, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is my professor, Dr. Larry Arnn, on the separation of church and state.
America's founders believed in the separation of church and state, in that the country was not to have an official religion or an official sect. But that did not mean that government was to be hostile to religion, or even indifferent to religion, as many today argue. In fact, America's founding document, the Declaration of Independence, includes both a reference to God as the author of the laws of nature and a confident assertion that human beings are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Far from being hostile or indifferent to religion, America's founders understood the theology of the Declaration to be an essential part of the education of citizens.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.org.
Hi, this is Rooster from Outcry Radio. Catch me here on Blog Talk Radio every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or follow my blog. Now, back to the Sackheads.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Here's radio.
In a moment, cancer changed our lives forever.
We were told nothing could be done to enjoy these final moments together.
But in that moment, when all seemed lost, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital gave us hope.
Because at this moment, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is saving lives with pioneering research and care. We're changing the way the world treats childhood cancer by sharing our discoveries with doctors and scientists everywhere.
And we'll never have to pay St. Jude for anything, ever.
At this moment, she wants to be in her own bed.
I want to be back at school with my friends. I want to be outside playing.
Please take a moment and join St. Jude in finding cures and saving children. Visit stjude.org.
And welcome back to the Evan Miller Report on the SHR Media Network. I'm Jason Miller. Corey Evan with some of the day's national news in just a couple minutes. But first, to our special report on Iran, Israel, and the United States tonight. Iran and the United States are likely to reach an agreement in talks over Iran's nuclear program. This coming from a senior Saudi Arabian prince today. He said, Prince Turki Al-Faisal, a former intelligence chief, said, quote, "We are going to have a deal. How good or bad it is, I don't know because we haven't seen the details," when he said the intelligence chief, speaking in London. American and Iranian nuclear experts were discussing technical details on a possible framework on curbing Iran's nuclear program in talks in Switzerland today. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry said today it saw no difference between Israel's political parties and called them all aggressors. Semi-official Mer news agency reported after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's election victory yesterday. Netanyahu's Likud party unexpectedly won Israelis' elections on Tuesday, despite opinion polls saying that the Zionist Labor Party was going to win. And the Luked Party warned U.S. President Obama's administration this month that it was negotiating a bad deal with Iran over its nuclear program. Meanwhile, Western governments gave a muted reaction today to the re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu amid fears that his increasingly hardline stance has fatally undermined the Middle East peace process. That's their opinion. The EU congratulated Netanyahu on his victory, but said it was committed to relaunching the peace process between Israel and the Palestinian state that he rejected in the last days of the campaign. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister David Cameron took a similar stand, tweeting his congratulations, but letting... Beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister David Cameron took a similar stand, tweeting his congratulations, but letting his spokesman emphasize that he wants to see peace, wants to see a two-state solution. Netanyahu's last-ditch lurch to the right, vowing that the Palestinian state would never be recognized on his watch, may have helped him clinch victory, but sets up an awkward diplomatic scenario, according to some analysts. Meanwhile, the Obama administration in Washington signaled today that it could take a tougher stance toward Benjamin Netanyahu following his decisive Israeli election victory and campaign tack to the right, saying there will be consequences for his sudden reversal on the ideas of an independent Palestinian state. While senior American officials said the administration was still evaluating options, they suggested the U.S. could ease its staunch opposition to Palestinians turning to the UN Security Council to create a state. There are policy ramifications for what he said one official of Netanyahu's campaign rhetoric. He continued to say this is a position of record. If Netanyahu holds firm to his opposition to a two-state resolution to the Middle East conflict, it could force whoever sits in the Oval Office now and in the next administration to choose between the Prime Minister and a long-standing U.S. policy with bipartisan support. Hours after the Israeli election results were finalized, the White House quickly reaffirmed its support for the idea of the two independent nations living side by side, a central tenet of peace negotiations led by presidents from both U.S. political parties. And the White House sharply chastised Netanyahu's party for using anti-Arab rhetoric in the lead up to the election. The Obama spokesperson and BS artist Josh Earnest said, rhetoric that seeks to marginalize one segment of their population is deeply concerning and it is decisive. Frustrated by both Israel and the U.S., Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has become increasingly aggressive in efforts to secure a Palestinian state through other means, including, as we stated earlier, the UN Security Council. The U.S. has veto power on the Security Council, and has repeatedly warned Abbas would block his efforts to use that avenue. But on Wednesday, a senior administration official said only the administration was evaluating its options on Security Council action and other possible responses, notably not repeating administration threats to block the Palestinians. A second official confirmed the U.S. could decide not to veto a Security Council action. For more on the possibilities of a peace process and latest numbers in the recent elections over in Israel, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Evan Miller Report. There we have a story of possible U.S. involvement in a possible voter fraud scheme conducted by the U.S. in that country. That's facebook.com/The Evan Miller Report. And now it's time for the National News Brief with Corey Evan.
There we are. I timed that a little bit bad. Thank you very much, Jay. The Fed on Wednesday moved to the verge of raising interest rates for the first time since the economy fell into recession more than 7 years ago, even as officials suggested the Fed might not pull the trigger until well into the second half of the year. In a statement released after a two-day meeting of its policymaking committee, the Fed said that it would consider raising its benchmark rate as early as June, and it removed from the statement a promise that it would be patient. Yet the Fed tempered that message today, including the release of economic forecasts by its senior officials that showed they now think the unemployment rate can still fall significantly without triggering higher inflation. That conveyed an impression that Fed officials may feel less urgency about raising interest rates so soon. And of course, I've got more on this story coming up in business reports, specifically how it's affecting the stock markets. Mrs. Yellen's remarks suggested that borrowers have a few more months to take advantage of exceptionally low interest rates on mortgages and car loans, while savers face a few more months of very meager returns on their low-risk investments. And even after the Fed moves to raise its key interest rate, borrowing costs may well remain comparatively low, try saying that 5 times fast, well into the future. Yeah. Investors, meanwhile, celebrated like the recipients of a last-minute reprieve. A now suspended Penn State University's Facebook posting photos of nude and partly nude women, some of them asleep or passed out, is sad and offensive and could lead to some students being expelled, the university's president said Wednesday. Quote, I can't imagine anybody that's not appalled by the alleged behavior, Eric Barron. The national leaders of Kappa Delta Rho on Tuesday suspended the Penn State chapter for a year over the photo scandal and said it would be reorganized. Police in State College, home to Penn State's main campus, are investigating allegations the fraternity operated a private Facebook page on which members shared frat house pictures of the women. According to a warrant, the invitation-only page had 144 active members, including students and alumni. Police have said they have identified at least 2 photos that could lead to criminal charges. Continuing. A young man who answered the door on Tuesday at Kappa Delta Rho said the fraternity had no comment. No trespassing signs were posted there on Wednesday. Barron said the university is working with police to determine the number of offenders and victims and will hold those responsible accountable for this evil.
All right, folks, we seem to have had a technical issue there with Corey Evan up in our Los Angeles bureau. He'll be back in just a couple minutes, hopefully, with the business report here on the Evan Miller Report, and we do apologize for those difficulties. Sometimes technology is not the most cooperative thing. Meanwhile, we'll get to some D.C. news as we await Corey Evan to call back in for the business report. An envelope addressed to the White House has tentatively tested positive for cyanide after 2 rounds of analysis by the Secret Service yesterday. Additional testing will be necessary to confirm the finding. The letter was received on Monday at a facility that screens mail for the White House and is located away from the grounds of the Executive Mansion and its surrounding buildings in the heart of downtown Washington. Initial biological testing came back negative, said agency spokesperson Robert Hochbach. Additional testing conducted Tuesday returned a presumptive positive for cyanide, though. The sample has been taken to another facility for further testing. The Secret Service, which is responsible for the safety and security of President Obama and his immediate family, said its investigation into the letter was continuing and will have no additional comment on the matter. Meanwhile, a little bit of bipartisanship over in the Senate, where Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid thanked likely Republican presidential candidate Rand Paul of Kentucky for dispensing expert advice on Reid's injured right eye. He said, quote, I really appreciate it very much, who was taking his turn presiding over the chamber on Wednesday. I want the people of Kentucky to know how thoughtful, considerate, and kind you have been to me over these months, Reid told Paul. On New Year's Day, Reid fell and injured the right side of his face and his right eye while exercising. He's had extensive surgery to try to regain his sight in that eye, which is shielded behind tinted glasses. Paul is expected to launch his presidential campaign on April the 7th of this year. And speak of presidential campaigns, an aide to expected presidential candidate and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker campaign operation resigned late yesterday after just a day after her hiring was announced. Liz Mayer, who was a digital strategist for Walker, came under a storm of criticism for her advocacy of some relatively liberal policy positions and colorful tweets that critics said were insulting to Iowans. In other news, I see Iowa's once again embarrassing itself and the GOP this morning. Thanks, guys, Mara wrote of a January event hosted by conservative Representative Steve King of Iowa. According to the AP, the sooner we remove Iowa's front-running status, the better off American politics and policy will be, end of quote. Some conservatives were not pleased with the hiring of Mayer. The chairman of the Iowa Republican Party, Jeff Kaufman, called on Walker to dismiss Mayer, and the right-leaning site Breitbart News ran a sharply critical story about her support for immigration amnesty. Walker made another massive misstep on Monday, hiring Liz Mayer. The Breitbart story was quoted as saying Maher's support for amnesty for illegal aliens is sure to dog Walker in Iowa, South Carolina, and other early presidential states. End of quote from that article from Breitbart. After she left Walker's campaign, Mayer fired off about 40 tweets that clarified her positions on issues like ethanol subsidies and reiterated her criticism of King. She insisted she was actually a big fan of Iowa, but has questions about its status as the first state to weigh in on the presidential process. Mayer also praised Iowa Governor Terry Branstad and Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa using still more colorful language. I don't know everything about Branstad's record, but my general impression is that he stayed true to himself and his beliefs while running. That takes some balls, she said, and continued on to say, quote, and yes, this means I've just been tweeting about Terry Branstad's balls. There's something new to be offended about. I also have given the lack of prevalence of mustaches among candidates and elected officials. Branstad deserves some credit for keeping his. End of quote. Reach for comment, a strategist for Walker's Our American Revival Political Action Committee, told the Business Insider that campaigns must have, quote, absolute respect for the voters. We accept those who have a variety of viewpoints on issues, but we ultimately must have is absolute respect for people across the country, the strategist Rick Riley said in a statement. He continued to say, Our American Revival is an organization formed to promote bold reforms across the country, and we're going to continue advocating for those ideas. All right. Now I believe we have Corey Evan back, and I believe we can now get over to the business news. Let's go over to him right now for that.
Thankfully, stubborn signal wouldn't reconnect for a good 5 minutes there. The Dow lost 227 points at 18,076. Gained 227 points, excuse me. This is what bad signal does to me. The Nasdaq picked up 45 points at 49.82, and the S&P 500 picked up 25 points at 20.99. But will it drop again tomorrow? That's the question. General Motors will shut a Russian factory and wind down its Opel brand in the country, taking a $600 million charge as it restructures to cope with a prolonged slump in the once promising market, a U.S. said on Wednesday. The car maker said, after several years of growth in excess of 10%, car sales in Russia shrank in 2014 as the economy weakened, battered by Western sanctions over the Ukraine crisis and sliding oil prices. The tumbling value of the ruble has caused customers to pull back on large purchases and raise the cost of GM and other manufacturers importing parts. In short, ladies and gentlemen, it's tough to be a car salesman in Mother Russia. Target Corporation, the second largest discount retail chain, will raise employee pay to at least $9 an hour this year, following in the footsteps of Walmart and TJ Maxx's owners. A person with knowledge of the matter said, Target will make the change next month, though there won't be a formal announcement, said the person who asked not to be identified because the move isn't public. Walmart, Target's biggest rival, revealed plans in February to boost hourly pay to at least $9 by April, and then $10 by February. Of next year, that is. And having second thoughts about those sheets you bought at Target? Relax. Now you have up to a year to return them. Target announced Wednesday it will allow customers to return certain store-branded items up to a year after the date of purchase. Previously, the limit to receive a full refund was 90 days. The policy covers brands owned exclusively by Target, including clothing lines like Cherokee and Mossimo, and C9 by Champion, as well as packaged foods by Archer Farms, kitchen goods by Chefmate, and baby products by Circo. It also applies to brands designed or distributed by Target, such as the maternity line by Liz Lange, and, of course, wine by Wine Cube. So how about that, Jay? If you bought yourself some off-brands to save a little bit of money, now there's some incentive to keep buying it, just in case something goes wrong. You have up to a year to take it back.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great deal. Some great advice. Corey Evan.
Yeah, I'm sure they take a little bit of loss on that, but at the same time, it'll encourage customers to come back.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great deal. Corey Evan with the business news. Thank him very much for that. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our continuing battle on what, Corey?
Global socialism!
All right. Thank you very much, Corey. And we start off with our continuing battle on global socialism. Missouri's lieutenant governor saying about the Justice Department, quote, there is more racism in the Justice Department than in the St. Louis area. Missouri's lieutenant governor lashed out at the Justice Department this past Monday, accusing U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and the Obama administration of racism in the wake of the fatal police shooting of Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager in Ferguson last year. He said, quote, there is more racism in the Justice Department than there is anywhere I see in the St. Louis area, Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder said in an interview with Newsmax TV on Monday. He continued to say, quote, we are making progress. We've come to an enormous way in 50 years. That's not to say we don't have still more to do, but it is the left, it is the Eric Holder and the Obama left and their minions who are obsessed with race, while the rest of us are moving on behind it. Kinder, a Republican, criticized the administration for, quote, inciting a mob during the protests that followed Michael Brown's killing. All right, Corey Evan will be having his ears perked up because his old stopping grounds of San Diego is now in our global socialism news today. A proposal to add gender identity and gender expression to the types of discrimination banned by San Diego's non-discrimination in contracting ordinance was given a tentative green light by the City Council's Budget Committee. The proposal, which was voted unanimously, will now be put forward to the full San Diego City Council for its final approval. If approved, the change would bring the city into compliance with state law. Including the terms gender identity and gender expression is an important step in the right direction, not only for the LGBT community, but I think for every San Diegan, Committee Chairman Todd Gloria said. He's continued to say, quote, we cannot and we should not award contracts to businesses that discriminate against a person's identity or how they choose to define themselves. End of quote. The current ordinance already keeps the city from doing business with companies that discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, age, or disability. Discrimination. Gender identity would be defined as a person's sense of self, whether masculine, feminine, both, neither, or somewhere in between. A person's appearance or behavior, no matter their sex, at birth. Try saying that and drinking a few sherbets.
You and your sherbets, Jay.
I know. And
you gotta stop drinking on the job.
I know. It's a bad habit. All that coffee is really turning my head around, isn't it? All right. Moving on, and speaking of coffee, the water to make that coffee is just going to be a little bit harder. New restrictions in the state of California on water usage were approved Tuesday by the State Water Resources Control Board. They have extended and expanded regulations as California enters its fourth year on a historic drought. The new regulations would require residents to wait 2 days after rainfall to water lawns and ask for water at restaurants. Residents are also advised to decline fresh towels and sheets at hotels. Decorative fountains that do not use recirculated water have also been banned. The new set of regulations comes at what the state says is a time when reservoirs are reaching low levels as traditionally rainy winter season ends without any significant storms. But here's a question coming from me to the Los Angeles DWP. You say we have to save on water, but why did you waste over 7.5 million gallons out of the reservoir and dumping it out of the sewers? It's below.
I know, right?
Ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
It has my throat dry.
And for those who are listening to the broadcast outside this room, I'm not yelling. I'm just venting my frustration to the state of California as they continue to profit on this government drought. And now it's time for one
Absolutely.
of Corey Evans' ending clotheslines for our global socialism tonight.
So, when will folks get over Ferguson? When will the government stop pandering to lifelong transvestites and start giving us some water? And when will Willy Wonka send me a golden ticket? Stay tuned for developments in our continuing battle against global socialism.
And now it's time for lawsuits across America. The cases are real. All rise for the Honorable Corey Evans.
Thank you as always, Jay. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Come to order. Lawsuits Across America is now in session. First item on the docket. Herbalife won the dismissal of a lawsuit that claimed the maker of weight loss and nutritional products fraudulently portrayed itself as a legitimate company, and that shareholders lost money because it was actually an illegal pyramid scheme. U.S. District Judge Dale Fisher in L.A. said that shareholders led by two pension funds did not show that questions raised about Herbalife's business by hedge fund manager William Ackman and various investigators, showed that the company had fraudulently inflated its stock price. This one has me a little bit tongue-tied. Ackman and his Pershing Square Capital Management LP have campaigned against Herbalife since December 2012, when they revealed a $1 billion bet against the LA-based company. Herbalife has long denied it is a pyramid scheme. And one that I touted at the top of the program about oil. A federal class action suit against ExxonMobil over a 2013 crude oil spill in central Arkansas has been dismissed by a federal judge, according to ABC News, who acknowledged in his ruling that his decision seems unfair. U.S. District Judge Brian Miller on Tuesday dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Miller said in a 22-page ruling that he was incorrect in granting a class action status in the case and concluded that the easement contracts ExxonMobil held with the property owners do not require the company to maintain the pipeline. Miller said his task was to decide between two options, neither of which seemed desirable. Yes, and that's no relation to Jason Miller, unfortunately, because if you did own any stake in oil, I would ask to buy in.
Ooh, yeah, I'm sure you would, but unfortunately, I do not own oil, anything related to that company anyway.
Yeah, unless there's oil building up right under your house, but I bet the property owners wouldn't budge on it.
I don't know. Jury's still out on that.
Right. And with that, I declare today's Lawsuits Across America case dismissed. And Raven-Symoné was a guest host on The View on Monday, and the topic of a now-fired TV host calling Michelle Obama a Planet of the Apes cast member. Well, the actress had a different take on the situation. Co-host Rosie Perez was adamant that it was a racist comment made, asserting that there's racism against black people in the Hispanic community. But Raven didn't see it that way. She said, quote, "Michelle, don't fire me for this, but some people look like animals. Is that rude? I look like a bird. So can I be mad at somebody that calls me Toucan Sam?" Unquote. Yes, it's true that some people resemble animals. In fact, there are tons of phone apps dedicated to finding out which animals you look like. But it's also knowing what is ignorant that is the problem. People are still saying that Raven was out of line, though, and that her comments were ignorant. I tend to disagree, Jay. I think that the fact that Raven is supporting this now former Univision host in what he said, even though I'm sure the Univision former host has apologized over and over, I think it's good to defend him because sometimes it's worth pointing out that someone looks like some sort of animal, even though I know that calling someone an ape is considered a racist comment in some circles.
Well, everyone is entitled to their opinion, and it seems like Raven-Symoné doesn't seem to mind it too much. So, for those of you
that's so Raven
at Univision, get over it already.
Yep, and besides, that's so Raven. And from the LA Times, if Jon Stewart is looking for something to do after he leaves Comedy Central, maybe he can learn how to be a gangster. To be a gangster, after all, is to own the world. Stewart will get his hands dirty with Goodfellas, interviewing filmmakers and cast on stage to mark the film's 25th anniversary on the closing night of the Tribeca Film Festival on April 25th, the Fest said Wednesday. And, of course, Goodfellas is joining the trend in other ways, too. In May, Warner Brothers will release a Goodfellas Anniversary Edition available on Blu-ray and digital HD, and it'll include a documentary about the making of the film that features interviews with the cast. It's all kind of funny. You know, not like a clown funny, just, you know, fun. At least that's how the LA Times phrased it, Jay. Take it from me.
Thank you, Corey. Corey Evans with the entertainment news tonight. Thank him so much for that. And ladies and gentlemen,
you're welcome.
Just a reminder of our top story tonight. 19 people, including 17 foreign terrorists, have been killed in a gun attack on the Bardo Museum in the Tunisian capital, Tunis, according to their prime minister. And stay with the Evan Miller Report for more on these stories and more. Go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Evan Miller Report, for more on this story. And on that note, that is the Evan Miller Report for this Wednesday, March the 18th, 2015. Coming up next is the National Weather Forecast from the BBC Met Office's Louise Lear, followed by the Exceptional Conservative Show with Ken McClinton. Also tonight at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, it's the Sackheads Radio Show. I'm Jason Miller.
And I'm Corey Evan. For all of us here at SHR Media, we thank you very much for listening, and
good night, everybody, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Here's the weather.
Hello there. Let's take a look at the weather forecast for North America. Warm, moist air continues to dominate moving up through the Gulf of Mexico. That's sparking off some pretty intense shower clouds that are moving out of Texas, and they will continue to drift their way eastward. So by Thursday, they'll be pushing out of Mississippi into Georgia and parts of Tennessee. Still some sharp showers to come across the Rockies as well. Ahead of that, some sunshine, but still rather cool into New York with 6 degrees as the high. Those temperatures in Dallas, Texas, 23 degrees, so the mid-70s Fahrenheit. Pacific Northwest seeing a frontal system pushing in, so yes, across British Columbia we'll have some snow to the higher ground, rain into Vancouver close to the coast. Oregon, California, fine and settled, and temperatures will reflect that into the mid-20s. That's the high 70s perhaps in terms of Fahrenheit across Los Angeles. Across that east coast, it looks as though here we will continue to see some rain just moving towards Washington, but ahead of it some sunshine. Now as that rain bumps into slightly colder air towards the end of the week, we could have a little bit of wet snow and sleet to come, but it's not expected to last. Behind it, milder air to follow. So that's the story then in New York on Friday. You can see the improvement though by Saturday, so we're not concerned about that too much. A few showers into Atlanta. Miami stays fine. Vancouver and Seattle, rain followed by showers for the start of the weekend.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.